Right folks, we're going to do cyanotypes. This is a very old process that they used for making blueprints originally. Artists have used it to make visual images, so they're using nature, bringing it in. Beforehand they would have used big huge drawings, laid the drawings down on it, exposed it. There's only two chemicals that are used in this process. There are ammonium iron citrate and potassium ferric cyanide. And it's not cyanide as in that it will kill you, so don't worry about that. But these are two chemicals. We do use gloves because they'll slightly stain after a while. They only react to UV light. So UV light has a shorter wavelength on the light spectrum than visible light. But it's slightly longer than X-ray. So with this, our greatest source of UV light is the sun. So we can do some of these exposures outside. And we also have an exposure unit which has got UV bulbs, kind of fluorescent tubes, which we can use when we run out of the sun. The process is very simple. The two chemicals, we do this in a room that doesn't have natural light. So artificial fluorescent lights won't affect this. But once we go into a classroom that's got windows, it will. So we have to prepare it in a room. It can be done at home. These kits you can buy, so Cyanotypes kits can be bought online. About £36 for this kit, which will do over 150 sheets of A4. All you're going to do is mix equal parts. So whatever you put in of one chemical, you put in the equivalent of the other chemical. So for today, I'm just going to do 2 capfuls of chemical B and then 2 capfuls of chemical E. For this, you need to think about the papers that you're going to use. Here I've got a selection of different types of paper. You've got a plain simple card, so it's porous. Porous means that it will soak in the chemical that you've got. So it'll dry into it without it falling apart. So plain card. We've got a watercolor paper, which is thicker but specifically designed for painting with watercolor. So it'll absorb, not straight away, because it needs a little bit of time for the artist to manipulate the colours on top, but it will dry and fix. You can use photo paper, because photo paper is porous. It will soak in, and it actually soaks in very quickly, because this would normally go into a printer, ink will be applied to it, and it needs to dry very quickly. So it'll give you a different finish. Cartridge paper, which is what you'll find inside sketchbooks. It's a thicker card, and it's got a nice cream finish to it, which will allow a little bit of texture behind in your image. And then you've got a white version of that. We also have what's called a backlit paper, which is actually a plastic with a very specific coating on it, which they use, let's say, in bus stops, where the light shines through the image that they've printed, and that gives a very good finish. And then also, because this is a process that's just using the sun as an exposure unit, we can go any size. We can do whatever size we want. And what I want you to think about in your projects is the WHII, okay, the we. What happens if I? And use that as your idea for creativity. What happens if I use newspaper? What happens if I use a piece of MDF? It's trying these different things, and that's where we get the word explore out of the assessment criteria. We're going to explore different techniques. So, the paper that we use, make sure that the chemicals are mixed. You will need to put a minimum of 2 layers onto your paper. So that's our starting piece of paper. I'm just mixing with a brush. You can mix with whatever you want. Ideally, if you want a perfect print, you need to apply it evenly. What I use is a normal kitchen sponge. Get a fresh one so it doesn't have any chemicals in it. Start in the middle and just go straight across. You'll have some residue over here, so just take it and spread it across. If you get even strokes, you'll get an even exposure, but you don't have to. You don't have to go to the edge of the page. You could do a square in the middle of the page. But for this demonstration, I'm just going to do it evenly. You will need this to dry, so if you're doing a couple of sheets, it's good to just keep going on a cycle of them. Preferably do it with card underneath. This will wipe off a surface, but to save cleaning time, if you just do it with card or newspaper underneath, it's best. So that's what it looks like for the moment. We'll leave that one to dry by the time I've painted onto this one. So using a brush stroke, you're going to get a different effect. We're not going to go the whole way to the edge. So this process is pre-photography. People are using this to create images on paper. With this effect, we're going to have a variety of different textures. As I said, you will have to put on a second layer, and these papers work best if they've had a couple of days to fully dry, so it's fully set into it. What I'd advise you to do is when you're doing your papers is, before you start off, write your name on the back of it. Then you'll know once we put them into a big drying area. So, to recap, it's ammonium iron citrate with potassium ferric cyanide. Mix them together, equal amounts, and then apply whatever way you want to a piece of paper to get whatever effect. While they're drying, I'll show you these. We will put down objects with glass, like these ones here. So you're going to foliage, we're going to put the piece of paper underneath with the foliage, leaves, whatever on top, and then we'll put glass or perspex down and expose it. And again, the sun is our exposure unit. Okay, if we have problems with the sun, we'll go down to our exposure machine downstairs. That's what we do. We expose that. What you can also do, and we'll be doing later on, is after we've taken photographs of leaves, trees, or random portraits of people, our project's about nature, that's what we're going to focus on. We'll take a photograph, we'll convert it to black and white. In Photoshop, we'll then invert the photograph. Because what will happen is, where you've got something on top of the light-sensitive paper, the area underneath doesn't, or partially gets exposed. So we want to make sure that we've got the opposite happening. So for us to do that, we need to make a negative. So we invert what we've got into a negative. From that, we could put that down onto photographic paper, but we're not going to get much detail. We'll photocopy it onto acetate or tracing paper. That will allow the light to pass through the areas, and then once the light passes through the areas, it becomes positive. So where here is, to react to the light, it's become positive. So our negative then reverts back into positive. And then we'll expose it onto a piece of paper that we've already pre-treated at least twice. And here you begin to see the effect of not worrying about the edges. Okay, you begin to, and you'll see that it's had one layer up here, but here it's had the two layers. When we expose this, it becomes very dark and muddy almost. All right, we need to make sure that it's dark enough to expose. So the second layer, you apply it on the same way. And if I could ask for a volunteer to pop into the classroom, in the back right hand corner you'll see one of those glass frames. Okay, now if you bring it into me, all of it would be great. Thank you. Your second layer will go on. You need to pay attention to where it's going on because it's similar in colour. So with that, what I did, but I don't know if you noticed, I actually turned the paper around and I brushed it on in the opposite direction. It helps to get into all parts of the paper. So this ideally needs to dry for a couple of days. And then this one we're going to do by the brush. Turn it around and just see where it ends up. Again, there might be some parts of this with 2 layers, there might be some parts with just 1 layer. What you don't want to happen is you don't want a big puddle appearing on the paper. If you end up getting that, your paper will look something like this, where the chemical has gathered and decided to take a considerable amount of time to dry, and it'll ruin the final image. So leaving these out to dry for a couple of days. Then we have the process of exposing, which we leave it outside till the paper becomes a very dark colour. And we have a sample here. So this is before we wash it. This has been in the window for a couple of days with objects placed on top, and the light hasn't got all the way through. It's got through some of it here, it's got through some there, so we've got a varied effect. We need things with texture, with tone, with contrast in them. And the washing process is very simple. You'll use a tray of water, whether it's on the table or by the sink, and you'll just dip it in to start. And what you'll notice now is that the chemical which has been fixed by the UV light isn't washing away, but a darker colour, and the bit underneath, which was yellow from our original papers over there, is now washing it away, and you can see the yellow remaining in the water. We can see tiny little small bits of petals or stems, but you have to be gentle with this because all it is paper in water, and if you rub it too hard or if you agitate it, which means shake it too much, then you'll end up ruining your image. The paper itself will fall apart. When you hold it up, tip it down to one corner, and it'll actually pour out like a jug from the bottom. So we'll leave that there for a second. It's a good idea to hold it for as long as you can. Let as much drain off. And if you see any more yellow come out of the paper, just do a second wash. Alright? So there we got quite a good finished piece. So if we leave it on the paper to dry for a second, if you want to really kind of push the colours, if you find that this is a little bit too light a blue, with gloves, about a capful or 2 capfuls of household bleach, hydrogen peroxide. Put that into the water. Don't just leave it in the water, you will need to agitate it, to move it around, so make sure it breaks in. But gently. This will stain your clothes, that's why we should use aprons as well. And then you dip your paper into it. And you'll see very quickly that the colour will become darker, more of a contrast. And because we put a bleach on it, it's moderately corrosive. We need to make sure we've washed the bleach off. So the last stage, or the second last stage, again, with a corner to help it drip off. The second last stage will be just a normal, back to a normal wash with no bleach in it. And you do that. The drying process, leave it on newspaper. It will dry quite quick. If it's still moist or damp by the end of the lesson, pop it into our box that we're going to have allocated with a piece of card or something between it. But that's what you end up with. You end up with going back to I think 180 or 175-year-old process of 2 chemicals applied onto paper, becomes light sensitive but only to UV light. So it's only UV light, not tungsten, not fluorescent, not red light. Allows us to create an image, and we can decide if it's going to be a negative or positive when we do it later.